with great joy that I join you today. As you may be aware, for the past year and a half, I've been staying here in Dublin, Ireland, with the community. I had a great opportunity to go to Milltown here in Dublin, completing my master's in applied spirituality. Applied meaning integration, which offered a foundation for interconnected relationship between academic and lived experience. I would like to share the journey with you, the learnings, the questions, the 8-month journey to fulfill the requirement of the dissertation. I have a deep sense of gratitude that I was supported by the congregation to take this past year to primarily focus on study, and also with the support from here in Dublin, the community, plus the sisters who listened to my endless questions, edited my papers, and simply were companions on the journey. I thought of the best way to share this journey was to make a few videos which you can watch at your leisure. So as mentioned, a part of the course was to complete a dissertation. So I use this as a foundation to share with you, as it required me to reflect on life's journey and experiences. I am drawn to question the recognition and celebration of our diversity. I decided to explore this by breaking open the intercultural community living, focusing primarily on religious communities to narrow down the scope, though a lot of what is shared can be translated into other communities or forms of Christian living. Well, you're very welcome to read the dissertation. I hope you will accept my invitation to share in reflecting on the learnings of the past year, pushing beyond the academic limitations of the written material, sharing together in the questions, the wonders, the discoveries, and things that sparked. I have made them into short sections in a series form so that each section can be viewed with riches in its own right, while also part of the whole. Living as a young religious in an ever-evolving period of history, within an international congregation that is not physically present within my own national culture, I have a heightened awareness of being a minority, while being fully embraced by the universal nature of living as one family, one religion, united in oneness. Before we go further into exploring, in keeping with my cultural custom, I wish to first acknowledge the land on which we each stand as we join together on this virtual platform. We begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country which we stand, recognizing their unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land, water, and seas, and their rich contribution to society. We pay our respects to their ancestors and elders, past and present.
To know me is to breathe with me. To breathe with me is to listen deeply. To listen deeply is to connect. It's a sound, the sound of deep calling to deep. Dadirri, the deep inner spring inside us. We call on it, and it calls on us. We are river people. We cannot hurry the river. We need to move with the current and understand its ways. We wait for the rain to fill our rivers and water our thirsty earth. We watch our bush foods and wait for them to open before we gather them. We wait for our young people as they grow. The time for rebirth is now. If our culture is alive and strong and respected, it will grow. It will not die, and our spirit will not die. I believe that the spirit of Dadirri that we have to offer will blossom and grow. Not just within ourselves, but in our whole nation.
Coming from New Zealand, our welcome and acknowledgement of the land, the people and ancestors is customary in experience. It's an encounter. So I share with you the custom of pūrere, which is an instrument that is used to express a person. It is a form of storytelling, acknowledging our stories, acknowledging who we are and where we have come from. And it is by this acknowledgement that we are welcomed on the journey, so we can share with recognition and celebration. So moving forward in the cultural tradition of my country, may our pūrere join together to tell the story that is unfolding.
This is a pūrere hua. Pūrere hua. It's a Māori wind instrument to help you connect to your mountains, to your waters, and to your ancestors. And I'm going to show you how to use it. So first, I'm going to unwind the string. You're going to place your hand into the loop, take a hold of the string. You're going to give the pūrere hua a little spin. Once you get a momentum going, you spin it. To get two different sounds, to get a louder sound, you spin it harder. To get a softer sound, you spin it slower. And this is a pūrere hua. To all our friends from afar, bring with you your mountains, your waters, and your ancestors, and let our pūrere hua bind us all together. Kia ora.
From a simple act of acknowledgement of country, our cultural identity and awareness comes through. There is an invitation in it, an invitation to those for whom cultural acknowledgement is not familiar. Brooke Prentice, a descendant from the Waka Waka people and as an Australian Aboriginal Christian leader, breaks open this invitation using a Christian lens. Country is all lands, waters, sky, trees, plants, animals, birds, fish, rocks, mountains, and all peoples. In the recent annual celebration and recognition of Aboriginal people, our Australian Passionist father, Brian Traynor, reference Brooke in raising the closely interconnected relationship between this act and our faith, expressing that the country is all of God's wondrous creation. It is a sense of identity, of belonging, groundedness, and home. We live on a wounded, blood-stained country. Jesus understands, having shared our suffering and pain. Jesus provides hope for our country to be healed, restored, loved, and set free. Jesus calls us his hands and his feet to take an active role in healing country by protecting and restoring God's beautiful earth. We pray and call for treaty and truth-telling for healing country. Do you hear the invitation? When gathering together, it is easy to get caught in the us and them, those present or absent, dwelling on a divide or simply a singular. While these are very important observations to make and be aware of, especially when gathering to have conversations around particularities, reflecting on whose voice is present or absent. It is common knowledge that humans are a relational species. It is relationship that sustains us. If we gather in solidarity with vulnerability, marginalized, or the oppressed without naming the relationship, research has proved that it is not going to help sustain us through challenging times. Relationships are first. Looking to Jesus as an example offers a deeper, more profound act of what it is we are reaching for and how we are living. The example taken from the Australian culture of acknowledgement offers a foundation of togetherness interwoven into the welcome. In Christian language, we would call this an act of prayer, offering gratitude, thanksgiving, asking for the Spirit to be present, uniting us in this moment to the past and the future. What is stopping us from learning, embracing, and translating other cultural acts to our gatherings? It is a process that requires identification of the need for growth in cultural sensitivity and intentionality. Religious communities are collective bodies, one body. It is a unique position of having a corporate commitment and purpose. So the question is, why would we do this? We are not Australian, nor do we have any members of our congregation who are. Let us step beyond these limitations for a moment. As I have often heard from our sisters, what is true of the part is true of the whole. What is reflected by this culture is within all of us, whatever our culture of origin is. What is the resistance if we truly believe that we are together as one? Christianity teaches that we are one global family. We learn, we explore, and we adapt. A simple act of acknowledgement offers a profound shift in conscious awareness and identity. It invites us to a radical community living, recognizing that humankind is expanding its consciousness of global diversity while struggling to maintain cultural identity and national expressions. Religious communities are no exception. New membership is more culturally diverse than any other period in history. Though religious communities are rooted in gospel values and open to ongoing transformation, both individually and collectively, I do question and explore whether this is an ideal or a reality. The truth is, religious are living and working within cultural contexts that influence thought and perceptions. The goal of my research was to begin the journey to explore if intercultural religious community living is an ideal or an opportunity to foster unity and belonging. In exploring this question, I was guided on a path by navigating the writings of scholars. There is limited writing on religious communities in terms of culture and the shifts beyond a ministry focus. Given religious communities are not exempt from the influences of societal movements, I shifted my focus to search in other fields, ensuring a diverse range of scholarly works from all parts of the world, both by known authors like Anthony Giddens, Sandra Snyders, Pope Francis, Pia Parker, and less known like Antonio de Silva and others whose names feel like tongue twisters. I feel it's important that we expand our listening beyond just religious, beyond just those who are living or working within institutional system. Perspectives, theories, and research steeped in cultural realities gives a historical perspective which shines a light on the present, challenging thought, challenging habits or norms that have been developed. To bring about connection to the now, I also had a focus group of 3 sisters, similar ages, of different cultures, and different cultural experiences in terms of within their culture and overseas, outside their culture. They were all from the same congregation, gathering to share their personal experiences and insights, to start a conversation, spark a thought, and share together. I wish to take a few of my findings to break open a little with you. This has been an 8-month journey with a lot of discovering. These key findings I feel are important, which is not to dismiss the other findings I came across, yet I believe everything is interconnected. Therefore, all will come to the surface in some way. Yet, just to give a little insight and let the questions sit in the open for pondering, and to embrace as invitations. Not all invitations will be accepted or need to be, yet let the invitation open up the possibilities. There are 5 parts in this series, of which 3 key findings I wish to touch on. So firstly, in this introduction section, is to set a foundation for our journey together. To begin by acknowledging the research and the researcher cannot be separated. Then next, on the part 2, I would like to touch on the relationship between religion and spirituality, which was a thread throughout the whole research, yet also a personal journey to come to identify and acknowledge the relationship within living religious life. Then in part 3, I'd like to dive into examining the relationship between culture and gospel within religious communities. This for me has been very interesting and something which I have found explains experiences of personal encounters in communities, as well as missed opportunities. It is a conversation or debate that has been occurring below the surface for many years in the scholarly world, especially but also for us living as religious, with the conscious awareness of the dialogue to break open a lot of questions, a lot of blessings, and a lot of challenges. Part 4 will pick up on the role of language in living as religious, living to form unity. It is not simply referring to what language we speak, English, Spanish, Irish, Swahili, Vietnamese. It is much deeper and more profound than this. Terminology is important. Clarity in understanding each other is essential, yet the way we use language, the relationship and the origin of words we are using breaks open another dynamic of community living. I draw on Charles Taylor for this, a Canadian philosopher whose work has a secular base, but he himself is a Catholic, to add the dimension which he naturally adds into the lens which he views and challenges us on. This gives an emphasis to the interconnected relationship between research and researcher. Lastly, the one word missing from my research question and aim was intentionality. Intentionality came through from early stages of the research into intercultural living. And I found that it is intentionality that pushes us into a state of living from our true selves in relationships, not only in expressing of our spirituality or religion, but it offers the biggest invitation of all. Intentionality is the biggest learning and key invitation that is often assumed, dismissed, not present, or we are completely unaware of its life-transforming nature. So this will be covered in all of the series, each video that is yet to come. But firstly, let us dive into research and researcher. Given that we cannot separate the research and the researcher, just for a moment, I'll give a little bit of a background to the topic and how it came to be, sharing a small piece of me to understand the seeking that is present. So my experience of being a minority in many culturally diverse communities has in reality been one of letting go of personal cultural norms to conform to what is the dominant culture of the host community. In becoming a religious sister, the experience has continued, leading me to wonder if the potential for growing into the sacred oneness, which the gospel teaches, is yet to be recognized within our diverse communities. Religious life has always been prophetic, but given the reality of the changing nature of the church, religious congregations, and society, I wonder how it will maintain its prophetic edge in the current age. And I cannot help wonder and question if now is the time to commit consciously to embracing and celebrating our cultural diversity. It would offer inclusion and a sense of belonging, with the potential to eliminate minority and majority cultural mindsets. But with the globe feeling smaller and virtual spaces expanding, and the pandemic has shown us that so many borders are man-made, there is this awareness that intergenerational, intercongregational, and intercultural is the way forward. And I have this sense of an inner seeking to explore if the fundamental community configuration is the key that so many communities have not fully identified or are able to access to enable the oneness to come to fruition in all its diversity. Within this section, I will focus on spirituality and religion. It took me a long time to formulate my own understanding of spirituality and its relationship with religion. This journey was challenging, as living through the pandemic and processing my understanding in terms of lived experience left a sense of a dominant focus on religion as opposed to spirituality, which raises questions. While it is not the first time I have experienced this shift in relationship between religion and spirituality, it was the first time I could name or give articulation and process at a heart level to understand the relationship that at times causes an inattention. The logistical challenge of terminology in reference to the words spirituality and religion find authors sometimes using these terms interchangeably, presenting the need for clarification in their understanding. By exploring scholars' understanding and definitions of spirituality, which were predominantly emphasizing the external and internal connections, I came to a realization of the challenging nature in the relationship between religion and spirituality. For example, Sandra Snyder, who is familiar to a lot of us, she sees spirituality as a movement from the inner self that goes beyond private satisfaction, guiding towards what individuals recognize as a higher value, which could be God or world peace or the good of the cosmos. I think a lot of us would agree with her statement. And I've dwelt on this and I've taken a step further and I've come to this conclusion that for me, spirituality is the integration of collective experiences between the outer world and the inner self that guides towards the transformation of the true self. Through the unfolding work of the Spirit, the inner self develops through experiential encounters with all things, including God, self, others, and all of creation, moving beyond the self towards something that's greater. And for me, this is God. Whereas I understand religion as the organization or the institute, it is formed on adhering to a set of rules, rituals, shared beliefs that ultimately enable spiritual expression. It is collective. It should be evolving to keep with the ever-changing nature of the organization. Yet we all know the reality. As human nature struggles against change, takes comfort in the familiarity, and has a tendency to hold on to structures of times gone by. In all spheres of life, not just religious, but in political, in social, and economic. Speaking in the context in which we live, whether Catholic Church, congregation, order, institute, depending on what term is familiar, the fact that it has a long history makes it easier to see the changing patterns over time. It questions if an interconnected relationship is possible. While religious traditions are not popular, in some ways, the pandemic has emphasized that the ritual nature of religion is used as a form of comfort, with familiarity and a level of passive engagement. Again, this leads to questions as to why, during the pandemic, the Church did not use a more creative focus, with more of an engagement with the Word. It could have been a moment of engaging more deeply with Scripture and creatively embracing a different way to live the breaking of the bread. This pandemic has been a time of trauma. It was a moment of transformation also. It has been the perfect opportunity to build church beyond the norms and more responsive to the needs. The fact that the priests became a central focus of the on-screen liturgy illustrates a shift away from the countercultural living of the gospel call and the church as the people of God. Reflecting on this lived experience quickly guided me to the conclusion that religion and spirituality don't have to be understood dualistically. Snyder says spirituality can be a source of renewal for religion, and religion can be an anchor for spirituality, meaning it is an interconnected nature of their relationship that strengthens and sustains them. So awareness of the societal movements like postmodernity, ecological and technological advances are critical to understanding the context of life. The invitation is to develop a conscious awareness of the potential for unity between religion and spirituality, not restricted by individual or community relationship, and recognizing the divine that stirs the inner self and guides towards transformation. I can see this in intergenerational community living as an example, where different societal movements have differing degrees of impact on the members. And often members in these communities are defined or boxed by the societal or church movement. For example, pre-Vatican, technological age, generation XYZ, and so forth. The weaving of religion and spirituality enables the personal and collective integration, which can lead us towards transformation. So, where does this leave us? Personally, I believe that religion offers a scaffolding which enables religious life to thrive. Spirituality is an indispensable aspect of human flourishing. While often the restrictive or static nature of religion is emphasized in conversations, in media, we need a conscious awareness of our interconnected relationship between the two, which offers a new invitation that needs to be explored. This is especially true given that religious communities are struggling to form communities based on gospel values. The more institutionalized the social institutes are, the more likely they are to be prescriptive or habitual ways. This is how it's always been, or even in unconscious acts of behavior. The mantra has shifted and has moved to one of religious life will continue, but it will look different. Over time, the fog between internal church with theological emphasis and external cultural historical realities have created misconceptions, misunderstandings, and manipulations. And just like different languages, their particular articulation or expressions needs to be unlearned or relearned. The unique and rich blessings or gift to live in community who hold the same religious beliefs and values within the present moment of history is pure grace, where each person's inner spirituality takes shape from their unique experiences of life. Through sharing and dialogue, individuals' lives will enhance and community living will be radically different. To the degree that I can't help but wonder if this is another way for religious can bear witness, forming disciples whose integration of spirituality and religion reflects the Christ light in a world that is seeking. The journey has pushed me beyond dualistic understanding, teaching the distinction between religion and spirituality is critical for not only interpreting information and experiences, yet also preventing misinterpretations, enabling the forming of closer relationships. Spirituality primary focus is individual, with expressions of faith, values, self-awareness that strengthens relationships between God, self, and community. The difference between individual and community expressions raises question as to whether religious communities reflect the change which the scholars name as societal shifts in their use of spirituality and religion. at the connection between culture and gospel. It is a major finding, and in truth, it is lived, with all its blessings and deep challenges. I came across this quote by Pope Paul VI in 1975, which was my starting point for exploring. The split between the gospel and culture is without a doubt the drama of our time, just as it was of other times. I was alarmed that a quote from before I was even born could be applied to the church and to religious life today, in this moment. The profound insight it offered continued to grow as my research continued, united with conversations with religious sisters. To fully get to grips with what Pope Paul VI was expressing, the terms need to be understood. Culture is dynamic, which encompasses a constellation of characteristics that define or describe particular social and national groups. I use the term to refer to social behaviors, ideas, customs, beliefs, laws, and capabilities shared by a particular group of people. While culture is touched on in every aspect of life, it is the relationship between culture and community that I am drawn to explore. It opens me to wonder if we can ever reach a place of interculturality, because if we are not embracing, naming, or identifying our own culture, then the shift presents a challenge that may not be sustainable. A fact to remember is that culture intersects with personality, institutional ways, church thinking, and unconscious cultural norms. It is not until we look at our own culture, with its riches and challenges, that we will be able to intentionally shift to a new culture of growth through radical efforts to learn from one another. Acknowledgement must be given to the hope which comes with different nationalities diversifying religious life, especially when many congregations are confronting the reality of declining numbers. However, research shows that often cultural diversity is only acknowledged at a level of initial formation in religious life. The Western response to this has been to have conferences and courses for formators to address how to adjust their structures and processes to orientate towards addressing nationality diversity. While it offers great hope, I hear the voices of concern. I too am concerned by the challenge that is presented with embracing diversity. We are all aware of the secular movements around us, where globally there is a greater consciousness of diversity than ever before. Religious are not exempt from this. Though there is little mention of congregation conversations, inclusive approaches, or universal dialogue beyond those in initial formation, conversations may have happened, but scholars present a deeper question of perception that anyone joining needs to conform, to fit in with what is already established. This got me reflecting on my own experiences, with a sense that as a younger member, the expectation to fit in is present in our communities, but it is unconscious and running under the surface. How do I or we engage with this issue when, in fact, historically, sisters were not encouraged to share much of their own culture and background, and I have an awareness of limited or rare conversations expressing or simply sharing our different cultures. The challenge challenges articulated by Pope Paul VI of a division between gospel and culture was evident in the discussions and outcomes of Vatican II. There is no denial of the impact Vatican II had on religious living. Returning to the roots, the charism, identity, to respond to the signs of the time. Listening to sisters who experienced this change, there is a sense of a release of sorts from the institutional ways of embracing more spiritual or individual expressions. I recall when learning about Vatican II from Stephen Bevins, an incredible scholar, mentioning that religious congregations were the fastest and most amenable to the Vatican Council. Implementing radical change, developing group conversations, embracing the call to open the window to let the Spirit in. However, as many scholars will attest, over 50 years later, the depth and the transformative nature of Vatican II is yet to be fully realized. While I do not wish to get diverted in this area, it does need to be acknowledged. Attending religious global conversations through the gift of Zoom offers an insight into the diverse ways religious life is lived, accepted, and integrates with the Church. Anthony Giddens, a key scholar in the area of intercultural living within the religious context, identifies the one-way adaptation with simple expectations to fit in with the community and thus continuing with minimal disturbance. It is evident as a young sister, conscious of the cultural diversity, with a need for individualized cultural expressions, and the current generation that are entering into religious life. The fit-in at times feeds into a romantic image or misconceptions and often creates a culture that is not in alignment with the gospel. Voices within the religious institutes have expressed that it is only when intercultural values are incorporated in dialogue, decision-making, and leadership will it be possible to have a congregation culture based on gospels, love one another. Giddens reinforces that change only occurs by identifying the need to reject assimilation and tokenistic inclusion. He suggests that accepting the authentic incarnation of each member is only possible by acknowledging cultural diversity, which calls for ongoing conversion to God, one another, and authentic cultural values. Cultural challenges within religious life offer great insight to where religious communities place their connection or reference point. A Brazilian priest and theologian, Antônio de Silva, explores the reactionary shifts that have formed a historical framework of culture to be used as the primary reference point for religious communities. The starting reference point needs to be questioned as to whether it is from a cultural or gospel standpoint. The issue of living within the paradox of ethnocentrism and spiritual intercultural life is not always addressed, which leads to ambiguity in formation for individuals or for the whole congregation. It brings us back to the primary reference point, and as De Silva reinforces, which is the following of Jesus, which by its very nature is countercultural. However, often fragmented by the process of colonization, culture frequently holds the primary reference point and operates above gospel. The question is about whether religious communities are being radically countercultural and responding by living from the primary connection of the gospel, as opposed to societal culture. If we take a moment to reflect on the depths of this statement, that culture holds the primary reference point for religious communities over gospel, I believe that this is an invitation of its own. If nothing else from this research, take this gift. By recognizing through expression and ownership the cultural habits and ways that are present, especially if we are gifted the chance to have other nationalities present in our communities, then an opportunity exists for the emergence of transformative communities if we can identify and engage with diversity from the gospel standpoint. A similar call as Vatican II, return to the roots, to the charism, to the gospel. The cultural dominance of a Western approach is evident on every continent where the actions of the church and religious life are proposed from a Western perspective, resulting in a very distinct way of life. Recently, this was acknowledged in the Amazon Synod, where it was stated that there were moments when the church was complicit with the colonizers, and this stifled the prophetic voice of the gospel. Beyond acknowledging the historical role of the church in the process of colonization of land, people, and cultures, colonization may also account for an explicit resistance to the new emerging notions of cultural diversity within religious communities. Listening to voices of minorities within religious communities, the challenges and struggles are real. The experiences of dominance and exclusion are unconsciously fostered through the culture of the congregation that has been passed down the generations. In some ways, we could argue it's living from habit, while at the same time, Anthony Giddens stresses religious have a unique opportunity, with a common explicit faith reason for attempting to discover personal transformation, leading to enrichment and development for the whole community. It leads me to wonder if perhaps the gospel connection is assumed rather than articulated, which means it could be present or absent. Sandra Snyder's writings offer insight, with her identifying the presence of an evidential gap and questions whether, in using the word religious, an assumption is made that the gospel is always the frame of reference, or in the language I am using, point of reference, connection. Reflecting on my own journey within religious life offered an opportunity to examine the lived experience of gospel and the connection point of culture. During my research, I took the chance to explore this in conversation with 3 other religious sisters. During our conversation, it was evident from the first sharing on our culture that a connection or reference point for the group was family, which ran throughout every aspect of religious life we spoke about. Family was picked up and helped to bridge together an explanation of religious living and personal background or culture. A hard concept for a person like myself from a Western background to understand the depth of a named family connection point when speaking of religious community living. This led me on a journey to break open the family connection point, which I will explore in greater detail in the next part on language. parts so far, language awareness has been mentioned directly or indirectly. And language is more than definitions of words, or which dialect or language we speak. It is a form of expression. I am focusing on the spoken language as primary simply because this is our first form of communication, especially within community living. Picking up on family as a connection point that emerged from the focus groups, I would like to break this open more and look at it in light of language. To examine the family connection point, I use Charles Taylor, who is a Canadian philosopher. He is engaged in developing an understanding of the complex cultural movements in which all of society, both moderns, postmodern, millennials, and non-millennials, are seeking to live as disciples of Christ. One of his key themes centers on language. Taylor states that the origin point of language is that of relationships. He is referring to how people are born into a community that has developed an interpretation of the world and the meaning of things, events, relationships, and language, which means enculturation occurs from birth. Taylor indicates the origins of language are formed in the primary culture in which the individual grows. Therefore, based on the importance of one's primary culture has to living from a spiritual core, the integration of experiences will be processed through the first means of interpretation formed in the culture of childhood. However, every culture adapts, evolves, and changes at different paces, with the process of socialization extending beyond early years. Taylor's investigation begins with this question: why was it virtually impossible not to believe in God in, say, 1500 in our Western society, while in 2000, many of us find this not only easy, but even inescapable? That is, how did we move from the all-encompassing sacred cosmos to our current world in which faith is a choice, in which some people believe, others don't, and a lot are in the middle? I found Taylor's work fascinating. While not based in any religion, it is interconnected, touching on many aspects of culture, society, and personal development. Taylor identifies how people are called to greater activism, to engage in reforming. Religious faith or non-faith becomes more a matter of personal choice, as part of the quest for personal development, creating a shift in consciousness where faith, by becoming a personal choice, results in believers experiencing much more doubt. Taylor states, "We don't believe instead of doubting. We believe when doubting. We're all Thomases now." Language awareness offers the greatest insight and in some ways enables us to enter the heart space, yet it requires a lot of effort, openness, awareness, articulation, and consciousness of both listener and speaker. Take, for example, one sister expressed, "I try in community to live this sense of family that I have." The phrase sense of family, when applied in a spiritual context, indicates connecting between the sense of nuclear family and the wider universal community. What I am highlighting is the way that language is used. Returning to our literature, as mentioned earlier, Sandra Snyder gives an example with what she sees as an evidential gap when an assumption is made that by using the term religious community, which suggests the gospel as the point of connection. One more example is noted in the limitations within the focus group, given English was not the first language of the sisters. While this is a weakness of the study, yet it leaves me wondering if when making reference to family and religious communities, a phrase or a word or a translation has not captured what is being expressed to be able to be translated into the listener's context, leaving a sense of words missing or not understanding their meaning. For example, God's family would suggest moving past the biological or traditional family, leading to an interconnectedness with all God's people. This would reach beyond the limits of exclusive family units and expand into what Thomas Merton and Thomas Berry call universal community. By simply adding the words gods before family, alters the term family as a connection point. This can only occur when understanding the origins of language, and really is more in line with the gospel connection point. Who are my mother and my brothers? Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. My own conscious awareness is wondering if I have limited or restricted what the group expressed, given that I am trying to process through my lens, through my language. There is a danger in this, which is translated into community living. Processing and giving expression of our experiences within the cultural lens we hold can create problems in communication. An example can be found in the stories sisters share when returning from mission or cultural community experiences. The story has a context that may not be known to the listener. Therefore, the listener is naturally processing through their lens. An example, when sharing in my Australian community, my stories of my own country, New Zealand, were filtered through my sister's Irish lens, given that is their primary culture. Or we can take it a step further when I share about my living within religious life with my family who are not religious or Catholic. The connection is lost due to them not having any context to filter or understand. There is an invitation in this. It's moving beyond the words, beyond just connecting at a surface level of listening, rather engaging to more deepen the experience, to encounter what the other is sharing. Based on what Taylor is expressing, it comes to a question of what is your personal, cultural, linguistic world, monocultural or multicultural? Go back to your childhood, as Taylor states, your primary culture. This starts to break open the conversation, naming elements which help us to live in an intercultural community setting, or make it difficult to do so. How to deal with cultural differences on a daily basis, or as Giddens would say, eliminating differences or tolerating differences or managing differences. Understanding of family as a connection point among the focus group leads to questions of how institutional living may be perceived as an extension of the family. This is not within the scope of my research. It would, however, be interesting to explore the influence of the nuclear family within the religious community context. Taylor expresses language as a medium of understanding that has developed through diffusion and borrowing over the centuries. Our capacity to adapt our language shows our ability to respond to intercultural living. The same could be said about our religious living, which is evolving according to our ability to adapt. The more we absorb the dominant culture, the more the influence of our individual culture becomes marginal. Yet Jesus chose to become a person of the margins, where he could encounter others, engaging them in speaking from the heart, speaking truth with love, listening and uniting. This led to transformation for individuals and communities. If religious communities are based on a gospel connection, following the way of Jesus, then God's unity would be witnessed. Explore the scholarly writings, I quickly realized that intentionality is essential. I was personally taken by its importance, given religious make an intentional decision to respond and living the baptismal call in a particular way. When placing intentionality in the context of intercultural living, it presents an invitation that is progressive, challenging, and yet reflects the societal shift of our time with global migration and diversity present in our communities. The opportunity to live interculturally implies rejecting conformity and tokenistic inclusion, along with the notion of cultural minorities, or the language of I, us, them, to develop instead an attitude of intentionality. Intentionality in this context means living from the connection point of the gospel. In practice, this means uniting to bring together cultural and religious values, spiritual expressions, and language with an openness to be present and willing to integrate through dialogue and conversation. Presenting an invitation to enter into an understanding of the dynamics of intercultural engagement, which can only occur through reference to lived experience, creating space in all forms, physical, virtual, and sacred, where an authentic level of embracing others will naturally enable new life to emerge and open possibilities for the new dimension of religious life to evolve. I have learned on my journey that intentionality cannot be assumed, just like religious communities cannot be assumed to have a connection point of the gospel. Rather, intentionality demands a deeper exploration of differences, where diversity is fostered to enable new possibilities to emerge. It gives witness to the transformative experience, both for the community and individually, through conversation. By engaging in the process of unlearning to relearn, with openness and building to shift beyond surface things like food, language, cultural dress, enables all externals of culture where difference is present to spark communication, to reflect and identify where the origin point is, as Taylor states, or what is the deeper meaning of the behavior, belief, or saying. Through conversation, it enables a collective ownership and recognition in order to be able to grow and give authentic expression. My experience within our congregation around intentionality leaves a feeling we are continually seeking to go deeper. I am conscious that it is hard to reflect on intentionality, primarily as it's interconnected with many other things. An example that does come to my mind, for those who know me are aware that my cultural norm is not to wear shoes inside. In my New Zealand culture, going barefoot inside means that we are connected with nature, walking with the recognition of this sacred relationship. And when entering into a house or a place of gathering, we display this sacredness in gratitude and recognition of our interconnectedness with all of creation. Regardless of it being an informal or formal gathering, to wear shoes inside is an act of great disrespect of the sacredness of gathering. This is my culture. It connects to my spiritual expression with recognition of the sacred ground I walk on. To enter into community of another culture where an act of wearing no shoes opens an invitation of conversation around cultural norms, questioning if it's a habit or it has meaning. This sharing engages at a deeper level. It is not one-way sharing, rather a dialogue of listening and open conversation to identify the community way, individual's way, and then connect the two together. My experience here in Ireland was that the observation was made early, with awareness of culture of the community wearing shoes inside due to the land that we live on. So conversation and sharing occurred in recognition of where we both were coming from, and meeting in the middle with both requiring a small shift in behavior. It would be easy to simply say, wear shoes inside as you're in Ireland, or even dismiss it and say, oh, that is Karen. And by doing so is dismissing the culture of the person, holding little recognition of the importance of the act. By being open to listening and dialogue, the community not only strengthens, yet it continues to grow. Very basic example of what intentional intercultural living is about. When another culture enters the community or conversation, it requires a lot of conscious energy and continuous engagement at this level of navigation. By bringing awareness of what is habit, what is a norm, what is important, and continually shifting collectively. At this moment of time, the small written or spoken members of intentional intercultural communities express that it has not been mastered. There is no one way, no right way. It is a path that requires a lot of directed intentionality. I personally question the sustainability, the fact that, to my knowledge, no already established community have been able to shift into an intercultural community, meaning it is only when a new mission with sisters gathering from other countries than that of the mission base and to work together, having no two members of the same community from the same culture. We are talking about a very progressive and new form of community. I look around the world at the large migrations that are occurring globally and left with a sense that maybe this is the invitation of the moment to give witness of how harmony can be achieved when different nationalities live as one. As religious, there is a skill we are gifted, which is sometimes reserved for initial formation or big and collective decisions. Yet as religious, we are gifted to master the art of discernment, to call on the spirits to discern between influences that enhance or lead to a fuller relationship with God or transcendent reality, or where we are pulled away from this union. Discernment is inviting us to move into a space of learning, a culture of learning. It is where we are forcing each other to see things that we cannot see on our own. The creation of a sacred space, a relationship with one another where we desire for the fullness of each other to be nourished and grow. It is not conditional of age or culture. It is a process that is gifted with recognition it cannot be done alone. When translating to community living, discernment is inviting us to reach beyond our small world around us, inviting others on the journey by sharing and engaging. Discernment exposes systems, habits, the world that has shaped who we are and how we behave, that at times is hard to see. Once we are aware of something, it is entered into our conscious awareness. We are actively going deeper, or spiritually, we would say enabling the inner to connect to the outer for transformation to occur. It is not dialogue to stand on common ground, rather dialogue to acknowledge the differences, bringing me back to diversity, the invitation to unite together, to share and celebrate each other's differences, building together, which naturally will strengthen our relationships, our sense of individual selves, and charism. The diverse cultures of people in today's church needs to be appreciated and celebrated as they enrich the body of Christ, oneness. Spirituality integrated with religion flourishes when identification of the divine relationship with individuals enables authentic living to develop the fullness of the true self. Religious communities hold a unity through the charism, covenants, beliefs, countercultural ways that offer belonging through the source of life, God, where prophetic vision built on accumulated wisdom can emerge. Spirituality is the key to the strength of the transformative process when, through the connection between the inner self and the outer world, a person is guided by the Spirit to wholeness, beyond the self to something greater. Our fundamental connection to the natural world presents a whole other invitation to open our awareness to the other than human dimension of life. We live in a critical time where this new awareness is urgent. While this video series does touch on only part of the research, it does hopefully show the invitations that are awaiting for us. The challenges facing all communities as we prepare to boldly welcome new horizons for our future religious life, both in community and mission. In a world fearful of those who seem different to the point of wanting to build walls and barriers between people. It is in this world that religious are called to build bridges, to foster dialogue, and show the way that leads to unity, truth, beauty, and life in its fullness. The combination of life experience, scholarly research, and the indication of possible skills is what I'm trying to present in this very concentrated form. Can intercultural life become one of the seeds of prophetic hope that religious can sow in today's world? It is by no means an easy path. It requires a lot of intentionality. There is no path created or model to follow, which is an invitation of its own. Holding a connection point of the gospel, embracing our baptismal call to facilitate the authentic incarnation of each person, and continues the conversion to God and each other. It will always remain idealistic, an unobtainable idea or a theory without intentionality. To live authentic spirituality is to be intentional, and intercultural community living is no different. It demands intentionality. Without an understanding of the dynamics of cultural engagement, experiences will remain at a superficial level. Holding the connection point of the gospel is critical. It moves us beyond the culture, the environment, the space, the language, and invites unity and belonging through transformation. Intentional intercultural communities may be historical one day, but for now, they are an opportunity to foster diversity, create unity, and belonging.